I would like to have everybody join me in welcoming back Jack Kallmeyer as a presenter for our Paleo Study Group. Jack has been a member of the Cincinnati Dry Dredgers since the early 1980s and has served as the club president since 1988. The Dry Dredgers club is very similar to ESCONI and, in fact, is only 5 years younger than ESCONI. Jack is a committed fossil collector as well as a collector and reader of old and new books on paleontology. Jack has amassed an extensive collection of professional literature. He has also been editing the Dry Dredgers Bulletin since 2011. Jack has been the co-author or author of numerous professional papers, as well as a few non-technical papers. And in 2018, he was honored with the Harold L. Stripple award by the Paleontology Society. So welcome back, Jack. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, hopefully we'll be able to work this Zoom thing again. We practiced before you all got here, and we'll see what happens when I try to do it myself. Yeah, I'm excited to do this presentation. Maybe some of you may have been to a Dry Dredger meeting and heard this before, and maybe not. It's been a while since I presented it. So let me see if we can figure this thing out again. Do you think I'm already in the share mode, or do I have to do that again? Let's see. Let's try this. Ha! It worked. There. Can you all see the title slide?
No.
No.
Oh, good. Okay, because I don't see anything or hear anything now, and I hear it. So, all right. So,
We can't see it, Jack.
you can't?
No.
No.
Okay, now wait. So, what do I have to do? I have to go back to these. Is there something else I need to do?
We went to the share screen button. Is it green now?
No. I'll try that. Share screen. Here's something green. Is that on your end?
Oh, here we go.
There it goes.
Okay. All
There
right.
we
Now
go.
we're there.
Yeah, but now I've got all this other stuff on again. How did we get rid of that before?
Well, we can't, I don't think we can see it, but
Okay, if you can't see it, I
you
guess it's
turned
all
it off
right.
somehow for yourself, I think.
Okay. All right. So you're just seeing my slide, right?
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. We've accomplished something then, even if I don't know what it is. Okay, very good. So I keep hearing a groaning sound. Do you know what that is by any chance? I don't know.
That was Catherine's cat purring, but I just
Oh,
muted
yeah.
her.
Oh, I thought there was something else that I'd done wrong here. I keep learning about Zoom every time I have to touch it. So anyway, this is about an Edrioasteroid dig in the Cincinnatian. I have always told people you do not have to dig for fossils. They're just everywhere. They're all over the place. However, sometimes it's advantageous to do so. So I was lucky to find a few of these off and on in my general collecting, and then I got lucky back on what was that, early 90s, late 80s with a friend of mine. So we'll go through this, I hope. Now what? Okay, there we go. All right, so I don't know if you have a lot of inexperienced people or not, but I threw this in just in case. Edrioasteroids are echinoderms like the guys you see here, starfish, echinoids, stalked crinoids, and feather stars. And they're all made of calcite. Uh, they're made of stereom that goes like this mesh you see on the upper left. It's an open structure. Even it's open like that, that piece, that little part of the echinoderm is basically one crystal of calcite. It's all the same crystal structure. So what happens when they get fossilized, all those little holes kind of get filled in with secondary calcite. It follows the same crystal structure as that stereom. And if you see a broken echinoderm or crinoid or whatever, it has the cleavage, the rhomboidal cleavage of calcite, just like you see in the lower right. So that's the basics. So as far as the anatomy of Edrioasteroids, back in the day, even before I started collecting, people called them seat stars because it looked like a starfish seated on a cushion, if you will, or some structure. I don't know anybody that calls them that anymore, but that's kind of an appropriate old-timey name. We don't have to go through too much on the anatomy, just to point out a few things that'll come up as we go along. But what looks like arms of a starfish are actually called ambulacra, which is the part of the feeding structure of the Edrioasteroid. They're filter feeders. They have cover plates. You can see the arrows pointing to the cover plates. And try to get my arrow. There we go. And then here's an enlargement over here of the cover plates. And what they cover is a trough. That trough would have, mucus and cilia and stuff in it. Tube feet would pop up out of these holes. When these cover plates opened up, tube feet would be catching food particles in the water. They did then bend down, if you will, and stick them in that trough. The little cilia in the trough would move them down the ambulacra toward the center, which is they're calling the oral area here. And underneath this oral area, that's where the actual mouth is that goes into the innards of the animal. So once the animal eats, it has to get rid of waste, and that's in this case, this is picturing a Carniella palea, which is one of the species we're talking about here. The exit for waste material is called a paraproc, and you can see this almost looks like disorganized little plates. Some of the other Edrioasteroids like Isorophus, which you'll also look at, it looks more like a pre-cut pie, little triangular wedges. So they call that a pyramid structure. So the other thing to look at around the outer edge is the peripheral rim. That is plates upon plates or whatever. It ends up being the most easily found structure that you'll see when you are just find them out on a road cut or wherever laying around. That's kind of what remains after all this other stuff falls apart. And like other echinoderms, these will fall apart within days of death if they're not buried alive. And all the stuff in the middle is a covering. And if you picture this as a suction cup, although that's not just from a physical standpoint, not how it works. But this part you see underneath that is all the innards and the guts and the digestive system and so forth. And it'd be, I'll call it fleshy, so to speak. So that's part of it. Now, here's a real Edrioasteroid. This is not from this particular site I'm talking about, but it was easy to get a really close-up picture of those cover plates, which you can see them in the lower right blown up. Again, this is another Carniella. It was just a better way to show you what they look like in real life. And another thing, this is an upside down one. Both of the photos on this slide are inverted. They were inverted on matrix or on whatever, and you can see the underside. So it's exposing those floor plates and the mouth, which is in the center there. And I showed the picture on the lower right because I thought the mouth showed up a little more clearly. That's again from a different site, but it's got almost like a little cloverleaf structure. And the Isorophus, that's one of the ways you can tell this is an Isorophus. Carniella, that structure looks more like a keyhole. So they look different from the underside. So I think that pretty well tells the story on that. The other thing is how the actual theca looks in life. We find them, they're all mostly usually flat because they've been buried and compressed with the sediments. But in life, they would have had like the one on the left, the Isorophus or Carniella types, would have a low dome shape. And then when they were feeding, they'd kind of puff up, if you will, to a higher dome shape. Again, the Edrio picture in that diagram is not a Carniella or Isorophus, it's some other kind. On the right, there's what they call a pure gate theca, and that type starts out, it can also be low when it's like at rest or whatever, but when it's feeding it can rise up quite high, as you can hopefully see in that top picture. And we have Streptaster, I believe, in our area, and one of the others we'll talk about today, is one that does that. And I'll show you how we know that. Feeding. Here's Bruce Bell, who was the Edrioasteroid god in the 70s. He wrote the book that's always called the Edrio Bible. It was his PhD thesis on Edrioasteroids. Anyway, he drew this rendition of a Carniella in its feeding mode. And you can see the little tube feet sticking up. The cover plates open up kind of like a zipper. And again, the food would go down into the grooves there, head in toward the mouth. Well, the other thing I didn't mention was on one of the first slides was this thing called a hydropore. That's what this little slit is right here. If you can see that in the middle. And that is where water could go in and out to get to the hydrovascular system that echinoderms use to, one, puff up, make the tube feet work, and so on. That's what that's for. So, and here's an artist rendition of Edrios eating and living. These also are not, the ones for the Cincinnati, and these are what, Devonian apparently. But it's good representation. You can see how they might have looked in life, where the 2 feet, the little yellow thing sticking out, and we have the excretory function going on with these little volcanoes. So I thought that was a good illustration of how they lived. So here's a Carniella. This little drawing on the left, I think, was done by Colin Summerall. Believe me, you'll see later, I'm not an artist. And then on the right is one of actually the best of the Carniella that I found on our dig site. And you can see the big plates here in the middle and the ambulacra that almost look like zippers. This is an Isoropus, and this again is one of the best ones from our site. Here you can clearly see the anal pyramid, they call it, the little pie-shaped wedges, and it's over here is this little bump. Can't really see the plate sutures too well in the photograph. There's other techniques to photograph it where you can see plate boundaries, but I didn't do any of that these are just regular old photos. So this one's again, a quite nice one. And again, you'll see this more often because it illustrates some points later. And this is a streptaster. It's one of my favorite ones, maybe because the name is kind of cool. Streptaster vorticulatus. All the ambulacra in this one all twirl around in counterclockwise fashion, where the other ones always had one going back the other way. So it's quite interesting to look at. And the ambulacral plates here are really tall, much taller than what you saw on that Carniella. And here's another little feature Streptaster has the others do not. They have spines on those big long cover plates. Most of the time you don't find them. Here, just in this one little area, here's the spines that are at the tip of those long, tall ambulacral cover plates. The photo at the upper right, it's harder to see maybe, but these are detached spines right here. If you can see my mouse, hopefully you can see the mouse moving up there. And there's some still attached over here as well. That's very unusual to see that. Now these, I call them these pseudo-life position. These are all Isoropus from our site because they're puffed up, they're domed up, so they're probably not in life position. My guess is gases of decomposition puffed them up when they were buried, and then at least it looks like, on the one down the lower left side, it looks like it's probably been blown out by those gases, and perhaps the one in the middle too. The one on the right, unfortunately, was on the edge of a slab, and the edges of these slabs were eroded, subsurface eroded, not up out in the weather, and it took off half of him, so he wasn't as easy to see all of it. But so we found 3 specimens. You can see this one on the lower left. It almost looks smooth compared to what we find as typical fossils, where again it's flat. The ambulacra stick up, the peripheral rim sticks up, but this is more reasonable as far as what they look like. And here's a decent streptaster. And I said this shows the kind of this period form. It doesn't show the form exactly, but it shows you why it can do this. These plates here, there's I don't know how many, hundreds and hundreds or thousands of them along the sides of this, and they shingle together. And so this could shingle and just rise up higher. And you'll see in some of the pictures later where some of these would just kind of be smushed over and slid down the side of a brachiopod to show that they do that. This guy, the little spines are gone off of this particular specimen. And I try to put scales in most of these photos, but I wasn't always good at that. Now, if you're out just tooling around collecting, this upper left one is what you normally would find. Just parts of the peripheral rim, maybe some of the plates in the middle that are just all disarticulated. The same with the one on the right is a very tiny one, but you can see you can't really tell much about that other than, yep, that's an Edrioasteroid. The one on the lower left is, I know two samples like that, two examples of that. And I don't own either one of them, unfortunately, but it's two streptasters on a cephalopod. And I thought that was really unique. I wish I did find one, but again, I didn't find either one of them. So I don't know if that's typical for random collecting, but that's how that was found. So now, where are we? You folks are all from Illinois, but most of you probably know about the Cincinnatian. The map in the middle is the white area is the Ordovician in the Cincinnatian area, where we collect. And people say you never tell us where you find things. Well, by golly, there it is, that little red dot. That's the exact spot right there that I found all this stuff. And as far as the ages and all that, we're talking now they call it the Cadian, but in the typical Cincinnatian, classic Cincinnatian would have been in the Maysvillian, the Corryville part of the Cincinnatian. So we're talking about 450 million years ago. So again, I wouldn't want to keep secret where this was, but there it is. Google Maps. We have a then and now rendition. Actually, the then isn't from exactly then because it's the first time I did this particular presentation. But you can see in both pictures pretty clearly there's a big tower, one of those high voltage towers for the power lines running through here. This is inside an industrial park, and I always called it Florence, Kentucky. But I found out when I did this Google picture, this is the newer one. There's this little red line over here. That's the limits of Florence. Florence is on upper left, and I don't know what they call it on the lower right, but I'm calling it Florence, but it's an industrial park area. To find this site, I had to get lost. So everybody in the Dry Dredgers, including me, back when this was in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, everybody wanted to find trilobites. Everybody wanted to find Edrioasteroids. And I may have found fragments of them before, but not nice ones. So one of our other Stripple Award winners, Steve Felton, who knew where everything was everywhere in the Cincinnati, and nobody found anything that he didn't know where it came from just by looking at it. It was amazing. He gave us a talk at the Dry Dredger meeting. And in that talk, he talked about Edrios, of course, and where to find them. And he gave specific directions of how to find a site with Edrioasteroids in it, nice ones, down in Florence, Kentucky, in this industrial park. Great. I took all kinds of notes. Well, it turned out we went on a field trip the next day. I couldn't go, but everybody on that field trip went with Steve to that place. So I couldn't go Saturday. I don't know why, but I couldn't. So I decided to go by myself on Sunday. So I tried to follow my directions. Well, some of the road signs, kind of like Georgia with all the peach tree things, it had different, similar names, and I couldn't swear that I ever found the actual site that Steve was talking about. But he did say, just look around in these industrial parks. You could find them in there. So I drove around a little bit, and I went down this one little side road, ending in the cul-de-sac on the far right of this lower building here. You see, and down a hill from the building was that big flat area. I know it's hard to tell from this picture, but this is all just flat, like they had cleaned it off to develop it for another warehouse and never did, and they still haven't. So I went down there and started wandering around. It's a big area on the surface. I couldn't find anything until I got down here in these trees on the surface. Like I looked down and by God, there's an Edrioasteroid right on a little chunk of rock. I'm like, whoa. So now I get down on the hands and knees and start crawling around. And I probably found a dozen of them, which was just unheard of. So, being all excited and everything, I told my good friend Stu Wheeler, who was my collecting buddy, and we went down there the next weekend, I think. And he said, the edges of these little chunks, these little slabs of matrix all look alike. They're eroded funny. So if you picture a jigsaw puzzle, how pieces all fit right smack up against each other. Well, if you took those upper edges and beveled them down toward the suture line, if you will, you get a little beveled picture on all the outside edges, all these slabs. So we started looking for that, and we found the actual layer. On this picture, I can tell if you can see the mouse again on this little, there's this little creek-like affair, drainage gully, right in about here, and started digging back in this way, and we worked it back in. We'd pull stuff out, and then it was all covered with mud. We started feeling around in the mud, and you'd rub on what you knew was a raphiscine, a brachipod, and you'd feel a little bump. Oh, it's an Edrios, so you'd keep that one. And the ones that didn't have that, or you couldn't feel anything, you threw them back in the hole. And we'd dig these holes and we'd fill it back in. We didn't want anybody, checking us out. So we probably lost quite a few Edrios that way. As we went on, we took those home and cleaned them. We found out that down in around where you couldn't feel by rubbing your thumb on it were more Edrios. So from then on, everything we excavated, we took with us. So we ended up digging quite a bit. You go back in so far now, it's like, well, now it's like real work, because you did too much matrix on, or too much sediment on top. It's got to be like 2 or 3 feet. So we moved around the site down this way and whatever. And one day I moved up this gully here, this drainage thing. And my friend Stu went out this way to see if we could figure out the extent of the exposure, if you will, because it looked like it was going to go forever. And I tell you, I believe fully if you went down there and pulled all this overburden off, it's probably way back into here. Who knows how far it is? It's probably huge. But anyway, it does. This is from here is flat, and then it goes downhill, downhill, downhill. There's a creek over here. So, obviously it was going to go away at some point. The other interesting thing about these, I don't know if you ever had to collect anywhere where these high voltage power towers are. But when we were down there in the summer, we went, I think, every weekend during this one summer. If you were there on a very hot and humid day, those wires sound like frying bacon. It was interesting, that was interesting. But what was the most interesting was the day we went down and the weatherman said, scattered showers. Well, that's no big deal. We can handle scattered showers. So we went down there. Well, it turned out it wasn't scattered showers, it was thunderstorms. And so we got caught in a thunderstorm, and I was a little goosey about being underneath those wires in a thunderstorm, but we kept digging. And one of the downfalls of digging holes in the ground when it's raining is the rain goes into the hole. So, and it's not easy bailing a hole with a shovel, but that's the kind of stuff we tried to do. But anyway, in the process of doing this, Stu was digging his thing and I was digging my area. And I looked up at those wires at one point and there was this huge flash on the wire. And I thought, oh God. I said, Stu, I'm going back to the car. So I hid out in the car for a while till that went by, and then went back out and bailed my hole out. And we certainly hadn't planned on that. Looking back, I don't know how we did some of this, because I think, as I initially mentioned, this warehouse building or whatever the devil it is higher than this layer down here. So there's a slight grade to get down into this area. Well, rocks are heavy, as you all know, and if you're down here with a lot of rock, it's hard to carry them way back to the other end of this building and up to the car. So I had an old VW bus, and I drove that bus down that grade into here. And I'm wondering how the devil we got that thing out of there, especially when it loaded up with a bunch of rock. Um, the day that it rained, I do remember, but of course we got soaked. By the time we got back home, which was at that time I was living in Centerville near Dayton, and get out of the car, and the seats that we were sitting in had puddles of water in them that drained off of our clothes. So it was an exciting day. So if you want to note that location, if you go down there, even though now this was apparently taking a different time of year, a lot more scrub junk in here, but I think you could easily get back to that layer if you don't mind digging a lot. But like I say, it gets to be a lot like work. Well, here was the days. This was my friend Stu when he was trying to find the extent of the exposure, and unfortunately, he didn't find it. He got down to a limestone layer, and he took all this limestone home that was in this hole, and there wasn't anything on it because it was not the right layer. This is when I was up in this little drainage ravine or whatever you want to call it. and this is where I was. And you can see how this is kind of, I don't know if this is glacial stuff or what. It's all, sandy, gravelly junk. Then when you get down, it's actually shale or mud or mudstone or whatever you want to call it. Comes out in big chunks. So we had to use the mattock like you see down in the right-hand corner and dig down. Stu's hole was a lot bigger in extent than mine, but this is about all I could handle. Uh, One thing was interesting about this, when you get down so far, before you hit the Edrio layer, which you see here on the right, there was something we called a sandy layer. It was all gritty, and uh, it was above this layer by about an inch. Everywhere we found the Edrios, that was about an inch above it. So I'm not real clear what that was. I should have taken a sample of it, but I didn't. So here you can see, the pieces are all jigsawed together, as I mentioned, but you see the kind of darker material here. That's like a rotten rock, if you will, that's between these joints. This is what I was trying to mention, how that was, subaerial eroded, I guess. I don't know when in actual time, but that's the way it was. So we would take out all these pieces to, just like they are, and take them home and then clean them up. But it was hard work. Believe me, it was hard work, especially in the summer. And as you see, I was pitching all my stuff up here on the side because this was lower than up here on the left. When Simon got done, I was worn out already. Again, we filled in the holes. So I sat up here and pushed this back in with my feet because it was just like, I don't think I could lift the shovel anymore. So, and then on that previous slide, I forgot to mention, Stu actually broke his shovel working in another hole. So he got a new shovel after that. So here's the cleaning part. Soak it in water, scrub it with a scrub brush. Then you get it with a toothbrush. And when I figured out that I needed this splatter shield because it was just getting me all messed up. But that's how initially we cleaned these things. This was mine. I had my stuff and Stu had his stuff. And Stu lived in Columbus, so he would drive down to my house in the Centerville area, and then I would drive the rest of the way. So here's what you get. This is still wet from being cleaned. And this is one Edrio. You see it's a decent sized one, but you see the rim and this hump in the middle. That's where the oral area is because there's extra plates in there, so it's higher. But in here in the middle of this particular one, it's the plates are all gone. So that's not a particularly great Edrio, but it is what it is. Another thing to note here on this particular slab is down here, this lower Raffinaskina. You see this little trough-like affair that's around that, and the other ones don't have it. I believe that because this particular raft was live and the other ones were not. And we'll get back into that in a minute anyway. So again, here's how I clean them. As you saw, big brush, then a little brush, toothbrush. But then I also had, at the time, I had quaternary O, and I'd take small pieces of these, suspend them in a solution with quaternary O, and it was a glass jar, and you could see this shale just falling off of it without doing anything. It was just rain right off of it. So this one had that treatment, so it's about as clean as you're going to get. There's no air abrasive used, nothing else, nothing fancy like that. So again, that's one of the nicer Isorophus. There's your anal pyramid again. So I always like to show this slide. I always like to complain about stuff for sale. So this is somebody at the time, it was somebody out of Indiana was selling Edrios. And so I took these pictures off the internet, and they're ruined. They're absolutely ruined. The guy obviously had enough money to buy an air abrasive, but he didn't know how to use it, or he didn't care. He either used the wrong abrasive or he just overdid it. So I don't know if the air abrasive polished these things or if he coated them with something. Either way, it's not good. This lower one here, he actually has blasted into the Edrio and the shell. You can see where the air abrasive has made little pockets around it. But he wanted $40 a piece for these things. Based on that, I had a gold mine with the amount of stuff that I had. So now the rest of this stuff is going to be from the actual dig site. So we had really big ones, which you see here. These are 3/4 of an inch or more. And they are complete. They don't have all their plates missing. Here's a nice shot of the anal pyramid on these are Isoropus, by the way. Then we had little bitty ones. There's one that's a millimeter. There's a 2 millimeter guy. These two bigger ones are Carniella. That much I can tell. The other ones are too small for me to determine what they might be. And then Carniella on the left, you've seen that particular image earlier, and the Streptaster on the right. I did a lot of data collection on this, which I'll tell you about in a moment. And what I did determine that of the numbers that I collected, 3% were Carniella, 3% were Streptaster. All the rest are Isoropus, all of them. So it was those three species, and these two guys were not as abundant. And looking at this slide, it's almost got a greenish tint here. I don't know. This may have been one of those I collected off the surface, just, subsurface. It wouldn't have been had any green on it. This is an odd one. This has got 6 ambulacra. 5, of course, is the normal. I think my friend Stu found one with 4, although I don't know what. I haven't seen that one lately. So I decided there may be some research potential. And the reason I decided that was University of Cincinnati, along with some of the dry dredgers, excavated a site not far from this at Florence Mall a number of years before this. And they did all this research on it and did all kinds of studies. And if you go down to the Cincinnati Museum Center and Union Terminal now, they're part of that excavation is there, all knit back together to show people. So they did a lot of data collection. So that, wow, we got something like that here. Thing is, one thing we didn't do, we approached this as collectors, not as researchers. So it's limited some of what we could do. Because what they did, they mapped their little jigsaw puzzle so they could put all of it back together, which they were able to do, and which way was north and all that kind of good stuff. We couldn't do that because that's not how we did this. So that part wasn't there, but there was other things we could do, and I thought, well, maybe you could. Some of you might be interested in that information and compare to that site for research. So I started to do this. I think it was over Christmas holiday or something. So I measured. I had digital calipers. I had a microscope with a measuring reticle, protractors, all kinds of stuff in order to do this. And this is how many Edrioasteroids that we collected between Stu and I. Mine was just under 2,000, and Stu's was maybe a little less than that because he had that dry hole. So that's a lot. So here's what we calculated this again after the fact that are based on these numbers and the area that we figured we had collected in about 70 Edrios per square meter, which is more densely populated than the site that UC had excavated. So here's some of my data collection, which I'm sure you'll appreciate. I numbered every specimen. I called it slab, and this thing on the left, it could be a slab or it could be an isolated piece of brachiopod or something. Either way, still called a slab, but every one of them is numbered. And I drew this artist rendition. You can tell my artwork now of what it looked like. For example, this one, it's a Raffinaskina shell, and there's 3 Edrios on it, and they're all Isoropus. This is I1, 2, 3. And then over here, it would have said, here's one here. This particular slab, I1, I2, I3, what their diameter was, and then where it was on the shell. And so that gets a little funny. You're going to say, well, why in the world would you do it like that? We used the hinge line as the 0. And then if it was on the right side, as we're looking at it, we measured the angle from 0 to 90 going up this way. If it was on the left side, we measured from 0 to 90 going up that way. And, if I was doing this independently on my own and hadn't seen the UC data, I wouldn't have done it that way probably, but that's the way UC did it. And I wanted to duplicate that. So that's why that's a little funny. So these are the data sheets, which I still have. And again, all these specimens are numbered. I have donated almost all of these to the museum collections. And I still hold on to some because I just love them, but they will eventually all get back together. And I did get to have the entirety of Stu's collection in the museum now also. Stu passed away a few years ago, and I managed to rescue his collection and get it down there. So it was used in research, just not about the Edrios. Uh, our buddy Ben Datillo, I think you're aware of, he did some research on the brachiopods. And in doing that, he took one of my specimens from our collection and cut the thing in half, which I was like, okay, it's good for research, whatever. But here again, you see on this raft, it's kind of like that one I pointed out earlier. There's this like little moat-like affair around here. So what Ben has found out in his research that strophaminid brachiopods, including Raphnaskina like this, used their valves to slap them open and close to blow sediment out away from the shell opening to try and keep clear. So the ones that have these little moats, you could say, well, that one was definitely alive because he was blowing sediment out. And if you go through this is his poster he did on it. It shows examples of here's the mode, it's filled in now and what they did. This also helped to solve one of the ongoing debates about Raphnaskina was which way was up, which way did they live? And it always made sense that they lived this way with what's that, convex up, because that's hydrodynamically more stable. But people said, well, gee, then is the opening of the shell will be down in the mud. Well, Raphnaskina figured out how to deal with that. If you turn them over, then you have concave up, which can fill that shell with sediment. Um, that didn't make any sense. So he's kind of resolved that as well as solve some life habits for this type of a brachiopod. So here's some other new project potentials. I actually started to write one up, and it just didn't go any further. I'd like to do that. One of the things about the Edrioasteroids around here is the statement they prefer, as if they're sentient creatures, prefer to be on Raphnaskina brachiopods, those big D-shaped brachiopods. Uh, there's another issue with the only finding little Edrioasteroids around the perimeter rim of those brachiopods. And if you found a big one, he'd be in the middle. I said, well, how'd that happen? If they started out on the edge, they must have moved to the middle. That's another idea that somebody has held on to for years. And then, of course, their paleobiology. So let's take a look at it. Here's the Raphnaskina, and hinge line in the back, the shell opening all around this curved part of the D. And the thing about them being around this periphery around here was that, well, that was a feeding advantage. That's why they preferred it. I hate that when people project those kind of things on these animals. They didn't have the ability to prefer anything, as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, they said, when the Raphnaskina was feeding, you'd open up, the lophophora would create feeding currents. Those water currents would help provide food to the Edrioasteroids, who also were filter feeding. That was the reason. So that's held on for a long time. So let's take a look at that. So here's a couple streptasters, and sure enough, they are at that commissure, the opening part of the shell. So far, so good. Now here's another nice Edro, Isorophus. Here's the opening of the shell, so he's pretty close to it. So that's again what they were hanging their hats on. Well, then what happened to these guys? You got some that are near the periphery, and then you got some that are even back to the hinge line. Well, how can that be ideal? Same here on the right. These guys here is distance out by the hinge line, and these are further away from the opening. Well, if they preferred this and had the ability to get there, they'd get there. If this was not a good location, they would have perished. So that's why I'm a little hung up on the preference of locations. What else? Well, look at this. Here's three nice Edrios, and they're on the inside of a Raphnaskina brachial valve. It's a dead shell. It's part of a dead shell. Same over here. This is a dead shell, and here's another Edrio on that, along with a nice Trematus inarticulate. So that seems funny. And what do we got going here? Here's two really big guys, and they're both on Corydodon's clams. You can't really see the clam very well here in this one, but trust me, it's there. And you've got a bryozoan growing on that clam. So that's not a Raphnascina periphery. And then what we got on this one? Here's two streptasters. They seem to run in pairs. There's two of them there, and they are on a bryozoan, which more than likely was vertical, when this was all living, and they probably got blown over with the burial event. And then here's another one. This is on bryozoan that's on a Raphnascina. But and then again, this also is, you can see 3 or 4 Trematus inarticulates on this. Okay. And here's a streptaster on a Trematus inarticulate, and one Icerophus on a Trematus as well. These 3 appear to be on the seafloor, if you will, a hard ground, because there's nothing there. This in this center picture, this is a Raphnascina, and up here this is a Raphnascina, and he's dead smack between them in the sediment. This fellow, you can't really see what he's on. Maybe he's on a shell that's buried, but more likely he's on the hard ground. And nothing to point out here is this business. That is a kind of pyritized worm burrow. It was, this was buried deep enough that not many predators got in there to disrupt these Edrios or feed on them. So they got buried deep enough to protect them from that. The Icerophus on the right is also appears to also be on hard ground. And this one, I'd like to figure out how this happened. This one's upside down, and he's kind of folded in on himself. And I thought, well, how the devil could that happen? So one thought I had as a possibility anyway, that maybe it was in that shape, if you will, and attached to a seaweed. There may have been seaweeds at that time, and that plant material is not preserved in Cincinnati, and so maybe that's what happened. Well, maybe not. Don't know. That's just kind of a guess, but it's kind of a neat specimen. And then I've got this one. This is one of my prize specimens. This Raphnascina, which is whole, both valves are there. So this was a live shell. It was on a slab, one of these slabs of matrix, with the side you're looking at down on it. But it was loose. It was just on mud, and so it popped up. And on the top valve, this is an Icerophus, a little Icerophus up there, like where you would expect it. Well, I decided, well, I'll make this a nice specimen. I'll clean all this mud out. Well, when I did, I come across this really nice streptaster, pretty big one. I thought, no, wait a minute. If this shell couldn't have been down in life and have this guy in the sediment, couldn't have lived. And if it was the other way around, this guy would have been in trouble. So it's kind of a question. But when he was found, this side was indeed down. So it's kind of a unique preservation. We do have some interesting fossils from here. Now, how do you get into some more of my artwork? This is I'll sign autographs later for the artwork. Getting to Edrio breeding with them is presumably like other echinoderms. You probably had males and females. Of course, we can't tell one from another at this point in time. And they would have spewed their little reproductive parts up in the water column, sugared by whatever phases of the moon or something. And they would have mixed and made little larvae. So this is the best I could do for Edrio larva. This is a larva from a modern stalked crinoid. And this is from initial and as it goes on and whatever changes shape till it gets to here. This is the crinoid larva. This is floating around as a larva in the sea. And at some point, it settles. It decides, okay, now's the time to stick somewhere. So the bottom of these things, which you see, there's my area. The bottom does have some kind of an organic stickum on it. And so they settle on whatever. And if he's settled on a good spot, he's good. He's anchored, and now he forms the anchorage in the stalk and the rest of the crinoid. And they don't move around. They can move around, as plankton. They have little cilia that can, move around a little bit. But once they're stuck, they're stuck. And I'm presuming this is the same thing that happens to Edrios. Now, here we have our little larva, and they're settling. And now what are we going to do? This is a modern brachiopod, valve wide open, feeding like so. With Bendatilla's work again, he's going through and looked at Raphnaskina. Everybody thought, he just kind of opened his valve just a wee tiny bit, to get food and all that. But it turns out that this valve mechanically can open this as far as you see here. And this makes a lot of sense. So this is the feeding position we're saying of a Raphnaskina, and it is the low floors down and all this white stuff is cause the feeding. And this is my rendition of a feeding Raphnaskina. I just took a couple bracts and stuck them together like this to take a picture. So if you're a larva and you're settling, the easiest thing for you to settle on is this, which is that rim that has all those little ones on it. And you might end up catching one back here a little further. But if you're a larva and you end up going on this side of that valve, your dinner, you're going to be, eaten by the brachiopod. So here's my little art rendition of Edrio larvae settling on good substrates, are the little gold ones. This is a hard ground, brachiopod, whatever. Bryozoan, the peripheral rim, but food or mud. And the ones with the red dots didn't survive. So there's no evidence that this is what happened because they didn't survive. So that's my little theory about why they are on the brachiopods the way they are. So where do they prefer to attach? We have living brachiopods, dead brachiopods, inarticulates, on bryozoans, on clams, on hard grounds. They're just opportunists. That's where I think what this shows. So the other thing I mentioned was mobility. And that is, why do we find little ones out here on the rim and big ones in the middle like that? And that reasoning is, could they move toward the shell center if they got bigger? So they're going to grow radially. That's how these things grow. So in order to do that, the way these are attached, they're not attached, they're not cemented in place, if you will, because they have to grow outward. So whatever's sticking them to the substrate has to be not terribly sticky, like the super glue we talked about earlier. It has to be just sticky enough that they stay in place, but not so sticky they can't grow and move outward. So here's one idea. Let's say we are a little grow, we end up starting life out here, and now we're going to grow. Well, we're going to run out of room. We can't grow beyond the edge of the shell. So we'll use this semi-stickiness to unsticky this in the middle part and just kind of keep moving, growing that way. Although it's still round, it just progresses toward the middle. However, even when he's in the middle, his edge is still down here. Another idea is, well, we just pick up, move. So that's another possibility. Although, again, I don't believe either one of these. So here's why. We have some fossil evidence that says that can't happen, or this won't happen. Here's the first one. We have a carniella over here. We have a carniella over here, and a very distorted looking Isorophus in the middle. Now you can see the Isorophus is got a, is rounded outside margin out here, but on this side it's flattened. It's like it's squished. And over here, it's like this whole thing is pushed inward from the left and the right as you're viewing it. And I think that's because he can't move. If he could move, he doesn't like being here like this all messed around. He would get the heck out of Dodge and move into the center of this shell. But I also think that this also shows there's some type of a pecking order here, that the Carniella, even though they're smaller, have some, chemical whatever that the Icerophus doesn't like, and so he's the one that's getting pushed around. So that's one example. Here's another one. This fella is at the edge of here's the edge of the shell. And you can see this edge of this Icerophus is flattened to conform with the edge of this shell, but the rest of it's growing out round. So his shell his test is distorted because he can't move away from that edge of the shell. And here's a more extreme case, and this is a little hard to see, I guess, but this is a big Icerophus that's on a fragment of Raphnoskina, and the commissure of the edge of the shell is here. And I've kind of highlighted it here, going around like this, and you can see this thing is all messed around. And if you look at underneath, his margin did not go past the edge of that shell, but everything else is all distorted because this Edrioasteroid cannot move away from that edge. And that's why I don't believe they can move. So these are the observations. They have observed that they cluster near the commissure of the Raphnoskina, many places. But here, we have less of that. Edrios at this site have colonized a multitude of substrates, and that Edrios in restricted growth space do not relocate away from the restriction. So the hypothesis is pretty obvious. We got to assume that the Edrioasteroid, if they have a high degree of mobility, they would have undoubtedly migrated to the best substrates. If they're not highly mobile, which is what I believe, they would have survived only on substrates that are suitable and died on unsuitable ones, and no fossil evidence to show that. Now, since they were able to survive on other substrates, then all these must have been suitable sites. So, once attached, Edrios were not able to move. So my hypothesis on this whole thing is that they're opportunistic and colonizing substrates, surviving and flourishing on any hard surface. Previous associations with the commissure of Raphnoskina bracts possibly resulted from larvae settling on an open and feeding brachipod. Edrios living more centrally on the Raphnoskina indicate that they had larvae settled on closed or dead brachiopods. And then this previous indications of a semi-exclusive association between Edrios and the Raphnoskina, I think, are a result of an ecosystem populated almost entirely with these brachiopods, with few other hard substrates available. Now, there are places in Cincinnati where the beds, they call them Schigel Raphnoskina beds. That's all they are. They're just Raphnoskina all over. And I think that's why some of these myths have been propagated through the years. So this is kind of the tagline here. These are all the people who had something to do with this, my research or this talk, and so one way or another. But I do have one more slide I want to tempt you with, and I want to see if somebody knows what this is because nobody else does. These are on our samples as well. They're not everywhere, but there's enough of them this is something. These little rings. I don't know if they're phosphatic or what, but they're little rings. They're not baby Edrios. I don't know what they are, and anybody I've shown, professional or amateur, has no clue as to what these things might be. So there's all kinds of cool stuff at this site. And that wraps it up. So any questions or comments? See, I'm not here.
Very interesting. I have a lot of questions. So to start with, you did show a couple undersides, although but I'm not sure I understand how they attached. Are they like barnacles, or do we know more about how they attached?
Well, they're not like barnacles, because barnacles would kind of cement themselves to a substrate. No, they're held on. Whatever's underneath them is like flesh and guts. Uh, Most of the chinerms have 2 feet that they might have used to hold on to. The 2 feet in these things are part of the feeding structure. So there's no evidence that says these have 2 feet on the bottom. Uh, that would be one way, I guess. But if they had 2 feet on the bottom, then they could walk away to another spot. So that's not what happens. So I think it's one of these things where it has some adhesive nature to the bottom, but again, not so strong to fix it in place. I didn't point it out, but one of the slides where I showed just a peripheral rim of what you might be able to collect. If you look where the rim is not, but where it used to be, there's no scar. There's nothing to show that anything had ever been there. So that's not how they do that. So I feel that they have some again semi-stickiness. Now, how the ones in this site, how they got turned over like that, not clear. How they did that. I have Edrios from another site that it's very obvious what happened to them. And in that case, those Edrios were attached to clams. And when clams in the Cincinnatian anyway, the shells are aragonite and they dissolve away during fossilization. So there's nothing. So the Edrio is no longer attached to anything. So you can find them loose laying around and they're upside down. But how these particular ones got to be upside down, I don't know for sure.
Are I don't know enough about these. I'm asking, maybe some basic questions. But are there modern species that are similar?
Not that I know of. I mean, Edrios are completely extinct as a group.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah, they went away in the Paleozoic sometime. So there's no modern Edrios.
Flavors, no compromises, just
I didn't catch that.
so when did they first show up in the fossil record?
Well, I only know them from the Ordovician, but I think they were from earlier in the Ordovician or maybe in late Cambrian, but I'm not certain of that because there are different forms. There are some that look like golf balls where they had an attachment point was small compared to the test, and the test would grow up around like almost like a golf ball. And I think those are maybe middle Ordovician, perhaps.
Does it seem that the brachiopods and things that they attach to, were they affected at all by them being sort of attached?
I don't believe so. I mean, everything here that they were on is healthy looking to me, but I would say that so, again, some of these things look like they were on hard ground. They weren't obviously attached to something. I think perhaps that even some of the Raphnaskina that were had these on them were actually dead and part of the hard ground. In other words, they weren't living at all. Um, the only way you can know if they're living is to cut them and find out if both valves are still there.
Did you do you ever see any predation on them? Um, or anything like that? Or were they just kind of there and nothing really did much to them?
To the Edrios, no, I didn't see anything like that where they'd been, bit or eaten on. Cephalopods would be the obvious predator you'd think, but I don't know how they would have dealt with something like this. These aren't huge, so I don't know. They would have not have made much of a tasty morsel, I don't think. So they don't seem to have had any predation other than when they die, worms going through the sediment or something like that.
So is there any way to know if they attach to only living brachiopods or
Well,
are they?
I don't think there's a way to. Well, the only way you can tell if it is attached to a living one is if both valves are there on the brachiopod. But as I said, the some of those shells look worn, and the ones that were worn were probably actually part of the sediment rather than a living brachiopod. And these guys were on them. So I think even the ones, some of the Rafnaskina that these were on were actually already dead and cemented into the hard ground that was this material. I guess that's why I say they don't care as long as it's a hard place. I mean, you can tell if the brachiopods eroded badly, that you can see, wow, yeah, it was dead. It's been laying on the seafloor and it's got all messed up. But the ones that where these brachiopods are alive, they're more pristine looking. The shells are more pristine looking because they were all buried alive, and apparently by quite a bit of sediment at the time.
I love your data sheets. I think, you know, I think so many of us do that, drawing everything out and everything else. And I think that's really valuable and helpful. So thank you for sharing that, because I do the same thing. I'm not an artist, but I sketch things out for myself and for the visual. And I really thank you for sharing that you do the same thing.
Yeah, well, I had hoped that one of the professionals would say, "Oh yeah, we'll take that data and we'll look at it and compare it to the other material." And it was like, nah, it wasn't of any interest anymore to them. So they didn't really do any of that with it. But some of these things, like their ability to move or not move, and that's what I wanted to actually do a paper on. Um, Again, there are some professionals who say, well, everybody knows that. And then there's other ones that still think that they can move. So it'll probably never go anywhere, even if I do write it. But I think this site showed that there's no way they can move. It has crowded enough that it's not really crowded, but it's more crowded than, say, the site that you see excavated. So you have a chance to see interactions like that Carniella-Isoropus interaction that you don't see elsewhere. And unless you're looking for it, like the Edrios that are on the edge, growing in a distorted manner, that tells you that they couldn't get up and move, or they would have. But this,
Fascinating. And I can imagine the frustration that, because there's not a lot of, research on it, where you've got all these questions and trying to answer them. I'm going, wow.
yeah, yeah. Well, there's even been some in recent years some new species of Edrios that found in the Cincinnati and down about the big Maysville cut. The species I've never found. Well, there's some other species I haven't found either, but the Isoropus seems to be the most common one anywhere. And
So how many of us are going to go back and look on all of our shells and everything else for what we thought were barnacles, and now we're going to all go back and scrutinize them to see.
And
Jack,
Yeah.
great program. Approximately across the different periods, approximately how many species of Edrioasteroids are there? Do you know?
Oh, oof. That's a good question that I can't answer. I don't know. I'd have to actually look. I could look at Bruce Bell's book, but there's stuff been described since he wrote that book, so I really don't know. Maybe a few hundred. I don't know.
What age did they become extinct in again?
Well, you still have the picture that one artist did was that those were Devonian. So I'm sure by the end of the Paleozoic for sure, but I don't know how far into it went.
I have one that I found up in Gilmore City, Iowa, which would be the Mississippian.
Okay.
So that's I've got others and stuff that different periods, but that's the one from Mississippian.
Yeah, down in Alabama in the Chester, you get extremely large Edrioasteroids, probably $50 size or bigger. There's a lot down there, and Chesterian is Mississippian. I'm not familiar with any Pennsylvanian ones, but yeah, I've caught quite a few of the Mississippian ones.
I think they're fascinating. One, that they're not around anymore, and there are some questions about how they lived and so forth. But there was, I think Colin Summerall did a paper on some. I don't remember what age they were, where they were super crowded on substrate, and I believe in that one he had shown a pecking order kind of a situation where this species, did fine, and the one next to it that it was a different species and get all cramped or whatever. I think he did a paper on it. Wasn't Cincinnatian ones, but in general, the Cincinnatian ones aren't that crowded. And we only have these few examples of it here, but I think that's enough to tell.
So what is the theory on how they grew? I mean, it's not rings or anything, but I mean, did the the arms, I don't remember, I didn't write down the name of the actual name of them, but did the arms grow with, or did they just grow around the initial arms?
Well, they're ambulacra is what you're talking about.
Thank you.
No, yeah, they grew out with the specimen. On the little ones, the real little ones, the arms are straight out, and then as they grew, they started curving around, so that you get that bent star shape out of them.
So they grew from the inside out?
Yeah, right. Well, they grew everywhere. No, I don't know where they actually added the plates, but as they grew out and got bigger in diameter, those ambulacra grew with them. I assume they added the plates onto the end, but everything had to get bigger. The ambulacra were small when they were little, and they got bigger as they grew. So, uh, but they do change where they grow. Again, straight out, and the real little ones, and then they start bending around.
Yeah, that's interesting because,
One thing I was wondering about is you had mentioned that you didn't see signs of predation, but I was just kind of curious. So you may not have seen that. I was just curious if they lost like part of themselves, if they would regenerate, or if they had any. Have you seen any sign of regeneration of parts or anything? Or
Not
if it's even possible, I guess.
well, not on Edrios. I have seen that
Yeah.
on some crinoids, but not on
Right.
Edrios.
Yeah.
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 And on the crinoids that I've seen like that, the preserved color of the plates is sometimes different, and the size of the regenerated plates is a lot of times smaller than its original size would have been.
Mhm.
But
Right.
I haven't seen anything like that on these Edrioasteroids.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. This site these are remarkably well preserved, especially some more than others, of course, but. And if you use quad O on them or what's that rock quat stuff, um, you get a lot of that sediment out of there without having to do any mechanical abrasion with like air abrasive or something like that.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if they were very fragile, and you talked about washing them off and using quaternary O. What is quaternary O? That was another question.
Oh, that was available back in the day.
Oh,
It was a very
Yeah.
stiff, sticky stuff that you dissolved in hot water, and it's
Like molasses.
yeah, real thick. It was, I think it stands for quaternary ammonia compound. It's used in detergents, um, but it's not that particular product specifically is not available anymore. They use different things now. But the one that somebody made available is called rock quat, and it's more liquid that is probably diluted, I guess, that I've heard people use. I have not. I've got some. I just haven't used it. I've still got like a little pint jar of the quaternary O, but it's like axle grease, and then you have to, like I say, dissolve it in hot water. I remember if you leave it in a container after a while, it seems like it gels. That's when I pitch it. But if you put it in a sink, and it'll just make all kinds of suds. But it really,
okay.
really worked quite well. I got it at Maps years ago when you guys were in Iowa.
Mhm. Yeah, I've still got some myself, both diluted and undiluted. I haven't used it for ages, but
so the little round things right here on this screen,
Yeah.
it looks like some really very tiny, I mean, really tiny drumfish teeth that have fallen down upside down. Because I have some that I've been finding in some matrix, and it looks very, especially the one on top, looks very similar to one of those that has fallen down upside down.
Well, it couldn't be those because there's no fish in the Cincinnatian. Um, so
Well,
We have two
okay.
other guesses in the chat.
oh, good.
Tim said, could the small rings on the last side be larvae that started to attach but didn't make it?
I think they're too big.
Too big. Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah, for larvae for these things. I mean, we have These are millimeter or sub-millimeter, and we have identifiable Edrios that are that size.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow. Okay.
and they would have already had some plating or something you could see. But these look, like one uniform little whatever it is,
Yeah.
whatever it's made out of. I don't know if that's phosphatic material or what the devil it is.
Jack,
Yeah.
they wouldn't be
Yes.
attachment sites for Spororbus, would they?
Uh, don't know. As good a guess as any, I guess.
Yeah, and then Trick said, is there any damage that shows inside the brack from the attachment from any attachment method? Could those rings be from gastropods drilling holes?
Oh, well, the gastropod thing, no, because they are just on the surface. They're not like into the shell. They're just sitting on the surface.
Oh, okay.
Um, and as far as damage to the shells, the Edrios don't seem to bother the shell at all.
Mm.
I know if you get like cornulitis or something like that out near the rim, it'll mess up the mantle and you get some distortion in the outer edges of the shell. But these it doesn't seem to bother them at all. I imagine they're fairly lightweight, compared to most things, and it wouldn't be a tremendous burden on the Raffiskina being able to open and close.
I was wondering about the fact that the bigger um, Edrios were more towards the center of the shell. How does the shell grow? Does it grow along the edge? And if so, could it just be that that is one that attached earlier, so it's bigger than the ones that attached on
Yeah.
rim because that rim didn't exist earlier?
Oh,
Um,
I see what you're saying. I guess it would depend on how fast each one of them grew, and that I don't
yeah,
know.
yeah,
Um, I kind of don't think that's the way it would happen, but they are bigger. But again, I don't know how now they grew. And, we have big ones down to itty bitty ones, so this is multiple generations of Edrios on this. That's something else could be sucked out of that data is how many spawnings, if you will, of Edrios this population is. And the
sure.
the big ones there are few, and there are not as many of those. Um, the smaller they get, the more of them you get.
Interesting, interesting.
I had never pulled that data together, although it's there to be gotten.
Yeah.
Jack, just one comment I have. Great program. You may want to think about, if you give it again, changing the size of your cursor. I was having trouble
Mhm.
following your
Oh,
cursor. I don't know if other people had problems too or not, but I couldn't figure out where I was looking at many times.
yeah, you know what? I tried to figure out how to do that, and I couldn't figure out how to do that. So it's
Yeah,
just one of those things.
it's in a settings, I think, on cursor or something.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
I should have gone back and tried to review that again. Uh, I was busy tweaking this. I changed it quite a bit in here from when I first gave it. Some of the slides are made better and some are replaced, and there's a few things just plain added that weren't there in the very first time I gave this talk. Um,
Oh, great slides and everything. I like them.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, I like having good pictures of these things. Uh,
I think I'll stop the recording, but we can continue asking questions as long as you're willing to keep answering, Jack.
yeah, sure. Everybody's got a question. Hopefully I can answer them.